Hey there, everyone. It's Matt from the Literary Gamers, and I'm coming to you from inside the dining room today because I've got some nice natural light coming into the house. So today, Jen asked me to talk about the series of books I've written so we can do some promotion for the channel. So the first thing that I want to mention is that I'm not very good at promoting myself. I've always been terrible at it. Even when I was writing like scholarship essays in high school for college, I could never write about myself. They always said, "Oh, just talk about yourself and get us 3 to 4 pages, and we'll do some consideration." And it would always come down to I could write a paragraph about myself. That was it. I'm not very good at this at all. So, without further ado, I'm going to start talking about my series now. The series has had a complicated history. At first, the series was meant to be a short story. And you'll see how well that lasted as I start showing you the books. Excuse me. So I started writing, and I realized that these characters were taking on a life of their own. And after about 40,000 words, and I was actually handwriting this series at first, I realized this was going to be more than I could even comprehend. So I started thinking about how I wanted to write this series as a book, and I did. So the first book in the series, and this is the first edition of it ever printed, called On the Edge of Divinity, which looks better that way, but it came and it looked like this. Didn't bother me too much. What is the book series about? Well, I really wanted to make it a family drama. Mainly because I felt for the longest time that stories that I was reading, the fantasy stories I was reading at the time, all seemed to have the same idea of trying to promote, different types of magic systems that they had. And I sat and I thought, what can I do that would be interesting not only to me, but to my readers? Because, let's face it, we all know that if you write something boring, your readers are going to be bored by it. So I decided to do a family drama because it's really kind of what I enjoyed writing. Was trying to have all these intricate little pieces come together. And while there is a magic system behind it, it's really more about the drama of the family. At least that's how the series began. And it kind of posed that question of you might have the biological family, but who's your real family type of issues going on here. And so that's where the first book kind of came about. On the Edge of Divinity was the first official book. Now, this wasn't the official outline I had finished. When I had... I'm going to put these over here because my whole pile is over there. When I had done the outline for the series, I thought that it would only be about 100,000 words long. And I timed it out, and I looked at where I ended with the handwritten manuscript at around 40,000 words and realized I was still only in the first quarter of the series. So I decided that, let's see what can happen if I break this all apart into a larger series. I also started using the first book, On the Edge of Divinity, which you just saw there, as my pitch to publishers because I thought the story was special. We'll go into the publishing history in just a moment. So as I had started bringing the story to publishers online and through the mail, I started writing the second book, which is called The Seventh Alpha. Now, for those of you who don't know, my books have commanders of the elements. Now, I know this has been done before, and I know it's nothing original, but in the world of the Meridian, the commanders of the elements are known as the Alphas. Now, the Alphas have complete control over whatever they use, be it wind, earth, fire, water, the underworld, or the heavens. That's only 6 of them. So the 7th alpha talks about the 7th element that can be controlled by a person. However, even though they have complete dominance over the element that they use, they also have a counterpart called the Omega. Now, of course, I am using a lot of religious influence here. For those of you who don't know, I'm a church organist, and I used a lot of religious, mythological statements about this world. So the Omegas have no magical powers with the exception of being able to cancel out their Alpha's Omega powers. So if they ever feel that an Alpha's getting too overzealous with their power, or they're going to do something that is a little questionable, the Omegas can basically snap their fingers and cancel that power from happening. Now, I thought that was rather interesting, and so far my readers who've gotten through the whole series have told me it was interesting as well. So that's where the term the Seventh Alpha comes from. It was about midway through writing the Seventh Alpha that I started hearing back from publishers about On the Edge of Divinity, and one that I really want to share with you was, wow, this is dark. They said they don't usually use the term dark when talking about the style of fantasy that I had, which was heavy on medieval, high classic fantasy tropes. They said, but what you've done is taken the family aspect of that and turned it into something very complicated. And that's why I often say the series for me is quite complicated. And they said that at this time, they could not publish something this dark. They said they enjoyed it, but it was a bit much. That's when I began to realize that, well, these stories were very personal to me. The stories got me through a very dark period in my life, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to craft it how I saw it, and would eventually write the whole series before trying to get it to go off again. Excuse me there. So instead of fixing On the Edge of Divinity and sending it out again, I decided to completely write the original outline that I had written down. And by the time I was done with the Seventh Alpha, which is a little longer, not too much, than On the Edge of Divinity, then I would finish the rest of the outline, which ended with The Cry of the Eagle, in this book here. Once I had all of that done, I would try to reform some of what I had completed and send that out. And then I finished The Cry of the Eagle. Sorry for the shakiness there. Then I finished The Cry of the Eagle, and the connection that I had with my characters and the story that my characters wrote became so much a part of me that I decided that I just kind of wanted to print this one myself. Now, I can still try to sell it as time goes on, and it would be cheaper for me to print out these copies and send them out instead of printing out, 300 pages worth of material and sending it to a publisher. But at the same time, I could learn to develop my stories a bit more clearly. And with that, I could have my whole series in hand. That decision wasn't made lightly. In fact, it took over a year for me to start writing the second book in the series. But, I'm going to put these down for a second, I decided that the outline as a whole was a complete story. It was something that from A to B, you'd get the plot, and it would be finished, and all the promises I made as a writer would be fulfilled. When I split it up like that, it still made sense, but the journey was a little longer. And so I decided to throw all three of those books into one volume. And that's where we get the book Rise of the Black Phoenix. This one is about, is it 700 pages long? Yes, 700 pages long. And all three books are in here, and everything is represented. All my author's notes are in here as well. If you buy the book nowadays like this, it doesn't have this nice shiny cover. And I kind of tweaked some things here and there out of On the Edge of Divinity, Seventh Alpha, and Cry of the Eagle, and, fix some plot points that I wanted to take care of. So with that, I printed it, and I was all ready to start work on the next book in the series. That was until I got appendicitis. So when I had appendicitis, everything kind of slowed. And that gave me a chance to really think about how I wanted to continue the series. But up until then, what I learned about myself was that I wrote a really standard fantasy story of good versus evil. And while it was something very easy to read, according to my readers, something very approachable, even though its size was rather large for some, that it was time to move in a different direction, time to do something a bit more creative. I'm not going to say original, because as soon as I say, I think my book here is original, I'm going to read another story and find out that it's not so original. But I wanted to start doing something different for each story. And what I've learned from that is that Rise of the Black Phoenix is your good versus evil story of the series. The next book in the series was The Casket of the Carpenter, which was also another long work, but shorter than the last one. This one is more political, I would say, and a lot of people call this book the stepping stone to the rest of the series. While it's not the most interesting of them as far as action, you get a lot of the world politics that go on in this book. And I'll talk more about Casket of the Carpenter in another video, perhaps someday. But it allowed me a chance to grow. Excuse me. It is getting to be flu season here in New England, so I am a little stuffy. Sorry about that. So the series began to grow, and I was able to kind of push the limits of what I'd done. I had not been a fantasy writer in my previous days. I had been more of a historical fiction writer. I had wrote some short stories about the city of Meriden, Connecticut. And so I knew I needed to kind of branch out and think beyond the box, and sometimes I even had to think as though there wasn't even a box in the room. So now that I had my political story out of the way, and a world war really begins in Casket of the Carpenter, I could move over to the Tools of the Irrigator. The Tools of the Irrigator, we head into warfare, and kind of the how the alphas, these commanders of the elements who should be able to take care of everything, are tested by this war that's come forth. And kind of learning how to handle loss. There is a major loss that occurs in the previous book, and how to continue, how to move on. And that's really what that one's about. And then in the next book, going to The Skull of the Architect. And The Skull of the Architect is a book that deals with a war that's been going on too long. But what it also deals with is people taking drastic measures into their own hands, and not in a good way, to try to bring end to a conflict. In more than one words, I introduced terrorism into the book, something I had never written before, and it was very interesting for me to kind of try to wrap my head around that mindset. But it came off really well, and that actually has been the most well-received out of them all so far, because just released in October was the Third Celestial War, which, according to the mythology of my world, is the third time the gods have descended to intervene in a global conflict. And that's what this one deals with. And I kid you not, I didn't plan this. I did plan for the book to have a pandemic, but that was long before the pandemic began here in the world. My notes back in September and October mention using a pandemic to kind of hold off part of the armies that were moving through the world. So it was very odd to me to kind of have that in the outline, because when I finally got to the portion of the book where I was writing about the pandemic was happening here in Connecticut, and we were in the middle of the shutdown. So that is the series. The whole thing is done. The whole thing is done. But I began to listen to the feedback of the people. Well, I mean, I was always listening to it. And one thing crept up. Wow, this is heavy. Not emotionally, physically. They said that each book being about 4 pounds, the lightest one is 3, that's Casket of the Carpenter. They said they would try to hold it up to read it, or when they were reading at night, and they just couldn't do it. And one person even said, I'm going to cut this book into parts with a box cutter, because I just can't hold it and read it at the same time. And that gave me pause to think about, well, maybe there's a better way that I can keep these books easy to access for the people. And I began watching other fantasy writers on YouTube talk about the processes they faced when they were dealing with publishing and length. I'm not going to mention who, 2 fantasy authors in particular talked about their challenges with their books being long. And one of them even said they had multiple beta readers go through and say, yeah, there's not much you can cut from this book, even though it's about 1,000 pages long. So I decided once and for all to, firstly, publish the books on Kindle, which I had not yet done, but also to move back to the smaller editions of the books I had done in the past. And that means bringing On the Edge of Divinity back into print, and seeing how that would go. Now, when it released on Kindle, it did well. You can still access On the Edge of Divinity on Kindle if you're interested. But one thing I did get a chance to do was retool some of the more confusing portions of On the Edge of Divinity and get a better grasp on the series. This journey's been about 6 years, and it's going to continue because I'm releasing a new paperback once every 2 to 3 months, depending on how the rest of life goes. So, and that's kind of why I'm here. On the Edge of Divinity is on Amazon right now, and it's a nice 9x6, light, easy to read, and it's available on Kindle and paperback. But if you help our channel get to 500 subscribers, we will be able to give away 3 copies of On the Edge of Divinity to our subscribers. So subscribe to the channel, enter a chance to win this, and then I look forward to your thoughts. The 7th Alpha is coming into print very soon, and I look forward to completing the series and seeing what people have to say about it. So that's all I kind of want to say today. The series is called Call of the Architect. It's a difficult sentence to say. Called Call of the Architect. This is number 1. Due to the size of the books, I will let you know right now there are going to be 16 in the series. But fear not, it's all done. I just need to reformat them into the proper size so it's a little easier to hold and to read. So thank you all for tuning in today, and I hope to see you next time whenever I appear on the channel again. Bye, everybody.